Okay, let's try this again. I was just explaining that rather than have two separate lectures, one on Malcolm X and Black nationalism and another on Black power, we're going to combine the two. I am not going to sit and play Malcolm X's The Ballot or the Bullet speech in here as I would have if we had more time. I would ask that you listen to that on your own. There is a link in this PowerPoint. I will try to make sure, or I will make sure rather, that it is still good, and if it's not, I'll make sure to get you one that is. So, we'll talk a little bit about Malcolm X, concept of Black nationalism, and then we'll segue into discussion of Black power. Malcolm X was born Malcolm Little in Omaha, Nebraska in 1925. His mother was from the Caribbean, from Grenada. His father from rural Georgia, a Baptist preacher. Both of them, not surprisingly perhaps, once you know a little bit about the man who would become Malcolm X, were big fans of Marcus Garvey, who we've talked about in here before. And in fact, they were active in United Negro Improvement Association. This led to their being harassed by the Ku Klux Klan, and so they moved, and therefore can be seen as among the migrants of the Great Migration who moved north to first Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and then to Lansing, Michigan, where they were met with harassment from a Ku Klux Klan splinter group known as the Black Legion. Malcolm's father was killed in what could probably be described as at best a dubious streetcar accident that was quite possibly not an accident, and the work instead of the Black Legion. His mother regrettably had a nervous breakdown and was committed to a mental institution, so Malcolm spent the rest of his childhood in foster homes. A troubled youth, to say the least. He dropped out of middle school after his white teachers discouraged him from his aspiration, or following his aspiration, which was to practice law. He moved to Boston, and then to Flint, Michigan, and eventually to Harlem. In 1943, during World War II, where he became a hustler, drug dealer, participated in a number of robberies, gambling, pimping, prostitution. He moved back to Boston, though, in 1945, where he got called up by the local draft board in the final days of the war, but he pretended to be psychotic in order to get out of that service. And he was arrested later that year for a series of burglaries and sentenced to 10 years in prison. But while in prison, he became an avid reader and became aware of the existence of a group known as the Nation of Islam. The Nation of Islam is a Black Muslim non-profit organization that preached racial pride, economic uplift, what you might call in Christian terms Puritan values, a very strict way of living. For members of the Nation of Islam, white people were devils. Black people needed to reject any notion of integration with white people and cooperation with white people, and instead to learn to love and to help themselves, so that one day they might return to Africa and be free of any and all white domination. So taken was Malcolm Little with the teachings of the Nation of Islam that he writes while in prison to the founder of that organization, a man named Elijah Muhammad, who instructs him to reject his criminal past, his previously immoral ways, and to take up the calling of the nation, to convert, of course, to Islam. And Malcolm Little then takes on the name Malcolm X as a way of symbolically rejecting the name imposed upon his ancestors by their owners, their slave owners, their purported masters. The idea of doing this is that eventually your Muslim name would be later revealed and would completely replace the name that had been bequeathed to you in slavery in America. He and Elijah Muhammad begin a mentorship, and Elijah Muhammad eventually makes him, once he is released from prison, an assistant minister at the Nation of Islam's temple in Detroit, Michigan. This is in the early 1950s. Malcolm X was released from prison on parole in 1952. And he becomes a spokesman and a recruiter for the nation. Helps the Nation of Islam open a number of new temples, including right down the road in Atlanta, Georgia. But it is in New York City where he first comes to the national public eye, where he takes up the cause of something that ought to ring true in the year 2020, police brutality. When he becomes an outspoken critic of the New York Police Department, he is surveilled by the NYPD and eventually the FBI. So he becomes a target of the police in New York and even of federal law enforcement, seen as something of a perhaps revolutionary. So what are his ideas? Black nationalism, first and foremost. The concept that black people constitute a nation within the nation. Yes, yes. The idea of armed self-defense. This is a rejection of the philosophy of nonviolence. Note that in the classical phase, those last few lectures that we've gone through, we've been focused on the nonviolent movement with leaders like Diane Nash, Martin Luther King, and John Lewis, who are committed to nonviolence as a moral philosophy and will not fight back when they are set upon by white people who would do them harm. The concept of armed self-defense rejects that and says we will fight back, as we have in the past. And if you recall the quote-unquote race riots we talked about during the redemption period in the early 20th century, we have, I was going to say, jump on in. It's election day. We talk about Malcolm. I love it. You got some caffeine in there, too. Huh? Hello. All 2 students that we have in here.
I had 3 and only 1 came, so.
Well, you're beating me then.
Just saying. So I figured.
We gotta take what we've got.
I know, we
these
need to
days.
combine them.
Exactly.
So what are we talking about?
We're talking about Malcolm X.
It was a really long movie that Spike Lee did. Did you see the Malcolm X?
I did, yeah. And I wish I could show it to them. Well, normally we would sit and listen to the Ballad of the Bullet speech too, but shot